Nobody expected this moment to land the way it did. When Caitlin Clark stepped back onto the basketball floor, the attention was supposed to be simple: a return, a rhythm check, another glimpse of the most talked about player in the sport doing what she always does. But something about this felt different right away. The energy in the gym wasn't loose, it wasn't playful, it was sharp, focused, almost uncomfortable. Because this wasn't just a star getting reps, this was a statement waiting to happen. People watching closely could feel it before she ever spoke. The body language said more than any headline could. Locked in, no wasted movement, no interest in anything beyond the court in front of her. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, and that's what made it impossible to ignore. When the league is buzzing with side conversations, side ventures, and off-court ambitions, Caitlin Clark showed up with one message written into every possession. This is about basketball, and someone needed to say it out loud. The timing is what made it hit so hard. The WNBA is sitting at a crossroads, riding momentum it's never had before. More eyes, more money, more pressure. And in moments like that, everything feels fragile. Every decision matters. Every distraction gets magnified. So when Clark returned, people expected highlights. What they didn't expect was friction. The kind that doesn't come from trash talk or rivalry, but from reality. The kind that exposes questions nobody wants to answer yet. Because this wasn't just about how she played, it was about what she represented in that moment. While others were juggling meetings, branding moves, and future plans, she was doing the one thing fans actually show up for: playing, competing, sharpening her edge. And the contrast couldn't have been louder if she'd grabbed a microphone. Without naming names, without theatrics, she reminded everyone what focus looks like, and that made a lot of people uncomfortable. There's a reason the room reportedly went quiet. When someone at the center of the league's momentum acts like this moment matters more than anything else, it forces a question nobody can dodge. Are we fully committed to building this league, or are we already looking past it? Clark didn't ask that question directly. She didn't have to. Her presence asked it for her, and once it hung in the air, it was impossible to unhear. What made this moment resonate wasn't emotion, it was clarity. No mixed signals, no hedging, no talk about balancing opportunities or exploring options. Just basketball, just preparation, just urgency. In a league where power dynamics are complicated and leadership wears multiple hats, that kind of simplicity cuts straight through the noise. It draws a line without ever needing to say where it's drawn. Fans felt it instantly. Clips spread not because they were flashy, but because they felt honest. Honest effort, honest intensity, honest priorities. People weren't sharing it just to admire the skill. They were reacting to the message beneath it. This is what commitment looks like. This is what belief in the product looks like. And if that feels rare right now, that's part of the problem. What happened next is where the conversation really started to shift. Because once that contrast was visible, people began connecting dots they'd been circling for months. Not accusations, not conclusions, just questions. Quiet ones that suddenly didn't feel so quiet anymore. And once that door opened, there was no closing it again. From the outside, everything looks smooth. The press releases read clean. The interviews stay polite. Everyone talks about growth, unity, and momentum. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere hasn't been nearly as calm. For months, there's been a quiet tension running through the WNBA, the kind that doesn't explode all at once, but slowly builds through half-finished conversations and forced smiles. Players feel it, coaches sense it, even fans have picked up on it without always being able to explain why. It starts with small things, conversations that abruptly change when certain people walk into the room, decisions that feel delayed or strangely complicated, moments where priorities don't quite line up with actions. No one's openly arguing, but not everyone is rowing in the same direction either.
And when a league is trying to push forward during its most important growth window, that kind of background tension matters more than most people realize. What makes this tension harder to address is that it doesn't come from obvious enemies or external pressure. It's internal. It lives in overlapping roles, mixed incentives, and competing visions of the future. On the surface, everyone wants the league to succeed, but the definition of success starts to shift when players aren't just athletes anymore. They're stakeholders, decision-makers, and builders of separate projects happening at the same time. That creates an uncomfortable gray area. Not wrongdoing, not betrayal, just misalignment. And misalignment is often more dangerous because it's easy to ignore. As long as games are played and highlights keep coming, it's tempting to pretend everything is fine. But underneath, there's a growing sense that the league hasn't fully decided what deserves its full attention and who exactly is responsible for protecting it.
Some players have reportedly voiced concerns privately. Not accusations, just questions. What happens when leaders are spread thin? Who's advocating hardest when hard choices get made? And what happens when the same voices shaping the league's direction are also imagining alternatives beyond it? Those questions linger, even when nobody wants to say them out loud. That's why this moment felt inevitable. You can only stack unresolved tension for so long before something exposes it. Sometimes that exposure comes through a lawsuit or a headline. Other times it comes through silence, through contrast, through one person showing up with complete focus while the rest of the room feels divided. That's when people start realizing the disconnect didn't come out of nowhere. It's been there the whole time, waiting for the right moment to surface. On its own, the idea doesn't sound controversial at all. A new league, a fresh format, shorter schedules, more flexibility. When Unrivaled was first mentioned, it was framed as innovation, a creative way to give players more opportunities without disrupting the main season. To casual observers, it sounded like progress, another sign that women's basketball was finally expanding in all directions. But timing changes everything, and Unrivaled isn't emerging during a quiet or stable chapter. It's arriving at the exact moment the WNBA needs complete focus to solidify its future. Media rights deals are being reworked, expansion conversations are active, salary structures and long-term growth strategies are on the table. This isn't an experiment season, this is a defining one. And introducing a high-profile alternative right now shifts the conversation, whether anyone intends it to or not. The situation becomes more complicated when you look at who's behind it. Napheesa Collier and Breanna Stewart aren't just star players. They're two of the league's most influential voices, both on and off the court. Their leadership and credibility didn't appear out of thin air. It was built inside the WNBA, through years of competition, visibility, and platform growth. That's what makes the overlap so hard to ignore. Supporters of the project argue that Unrivaled is complementary, not competitive, that it lives in a different lane, that it fills off-season gaps and keeps fans engaged year-round. And to be fair, those arguments aren't coming from nowhere. But what's being debated isn't just structure, it's attention, its energy, its momentum. When the same stars who shape the league's public image are also asking fans, sponsors, and media to care deeply about something else, dilution becomes a real concern, whether intentional or not. This isn't about accusing anyone of sabotage, it's about acknowledging perception. In moments of growth, perception matters almost as much as reality. Every announcement, every promotional push, every interview about alternative formats quietly competes for oxygen. And when that competition happens during the league's most sensitive negotiations, it naturally raises eyebrows. That's why this feels less like innovation and more like a collision of priorities. Not because new ideas are bad, but because focus is finite.
You can't fully sell the urgency of building one future while actively promoting another at the same time. Even if the intentions are good, the overlap creates noise. And right now, the WNBA can't afford noise. It needs clarity, it needs alignment, and it needs everyone pulling in the same direction, especially when the stakes have never been higher. At the heart of this conversation is something most fans never really see: governance. It doesn't come with jerseys, highlights, or post-game quotes, but it shapes everything. Who gets paid what? When teams play? How revenue is split? Which markets get rewarded with expansion, and which ones get left waiting? In the WNBA, influence at that level isn't symbolic, it's structural. And when the lines around that influence start to blur, problems don't announce themselves right away. They quietly compound. Being involved in league governance means having access to long-term strategy, access to early conversations about media partnerships, scheduling priorities, and competitive direction. It means being in rooms where risks are discussed before they're public, and weaknesses are acknowledged before they're fixed. That information isn't just powerful, it's sensitive. And the entire system depends on trust that it's being used for one purpose only: strengthening the league itself. This is why side projects change the equation, not because building something new is wrong, but because incentives start pulling in two directions at once. When someone helps guide decisions for one organization while actively shaping another basketball venture, even unintentionally, priorities can drift. Certain decisions feel less urgent, certain risks feel easier to accept, certain trade-offs benefit one path more than the other, and that's how conflict quietly enters the picture.
What makes this especially complicated is that no rulebook can fully regulate intent. You don't need bad faith for misalignment to happen, you just need overlapping interests. If an alternative league benefits from flexibility, experimentation, or disruption, and the primary league benefits from stability and focus, tension is inevitable. Even choosing when to push forward or when to slow down becomes loaded with consequences. Fans often assume governance is a formality, but it isn't. It's leadership. And leadership requires choosing one direction when things get uncomfortable. When the same individuals are tied to both sides of a growing ecosystem, the question stops being about legality and starts being about loyalty. Who gets your best thinking? Who gets your full energy? And who bears the risk when compromises are made? That's why this conversation has gained traction without a single official accusation. People aren't claiming secret deals or hidden agendas. They're responding to the logic of divided focus. History across sports shows the same pattern again and again. When decision-makers straddle competing visions, the core product almost always pays the price first. And in a league still fighting to solidify its foundation, that price feels especially high. What separates Caitlin Clark from everyone else in this conversation isn't just talent, it's positioning. She doesn't need leverage, she already is the leverage. No other player in women's basketball has shifted attention, ratings, and attendance the way she has in such a short period of time. When she plays, arenas fill up. When she's on TV, numbers spike. When she speaks, people listen, not because they're told to, but because the league's recent momentum is directly tied to her presence. That's why her voice carries a different kind of weight. She isn't commenting from the outside. She isn't protecting a legacy that's already written. She's in the middle of building something that only works if the WNBA works. Her success is inseparable from the league's success. If the WNBA grows stronger, she benefits. If it fractures, she loses more than almost anyone else in the room. That alone changes how her words land. There's also no confusion about her priorities. She isn't juggling branding ventures that pull attention away from the court. She isn't positioning herself as a behind-the-scenes power broker. She's doing the simplest thing possible at the loudest moment imaginable, showing up and playing. That simplicity is why people find her credible. There's no angle to decode, no hidden motive to guess at.
Her message doesn't come from speeches or strategy decks, it comes from consistency. And that contrast matters. When someone who gains the most from stability is the one calling for focus, it reframes the entire debate. This isn't jealousy, it isn't resistance to change, it's urgency. The urgency of someone who sees a rare window opening and doesn't want to watch it get cluttered by competing priorities. When Clark speaks about playing WNBA basketball, it doesn't sound like branding, it sounds like protection. Fans recognize that instinctively. They've watched leagues miss moments like this before. Stars arrive, attention peaks, and instead of doubling down on the core product, leadership gets distracted chasing side narratives. Clark's voice cuts through that history. It sounds like someone who understands how fragile momentum really is, someone who knows that growth isn't guaranteed and that distractions don't have to be malicious to be destructive. That's why her comments didn't feel like noise. They felt like a warning. Not aggressive, not inflammatory, just clear. Clear about what deserves full commitment right now. Clear about what actually brings people to the screen. And clear about the fact that windows like this don't stay open forever. When she speaks from that position, people don't hear opinion, they hear stakes. The clip didn't go viral because it was flashy. It spread because it felt honest. A few seconds of Caitlin Clark in a closed practice setting, moving with purpose, reading defenders before they even committed, letting shots go without hesitation. No celebration, no theatrics, just work. And in a league drowning in conversation about optics, formats, and future plans, that simplicity hit harder than any press conference. What people saw wasn't just skill, it was intent. Every cut, every pass, every shot carried the same message: this matters. The gym felt different in that moment because dominance has a way of clarifying things. When one player raises the standard without saying a word, it forces everyone else to confront where their attention really is. You could feel the contrast immediately. No distractions, no outside noise, just complete presence. That's why the clip reframed the conversation. It wasn't random timing. It landed right when questions about focus and loyalty were already bubbling. Instead of arguing, Clark showed the alternative. While debates circled around off-court ventures and long-term positioning, she put the spotlight back on the product itself. Basketball played at its highest level. That's what fans respond to. That's what sponsors invest in. That's what gives the league its credibility.
Inside the gym, the energy reportedly shifted fast. Conversations got quieter. Watching someone operate at that level has a way of cutting through uncertainty. It doesn't accuse, it exposes. You don't need to call anyone out when excellence is doing the talking, and that's why the clip felt heavier than a highlight reel. It wasn't about scoring, it was about commitment made visible. Online, fans picked up on that immediately. Comments weren't just about the shot making, they were about what it represented: focus, accountability, a reminder of why people care in the first place. The more the clip traveled, the more it symbolized a growing divide. On one side, conversations about alternative futures. On the other, a player fully invested in the present. That's how narratives shift, not through speeches or debates, but through moments that feel undeniable. That short sequence did more than showcase talent. It recentered the discussion around what the league actually sells. Not concepts, not experiments, the game itself. And once that reminder took hold, it became harder to ignore the question hanging over everything else. Who's truly locked in when it matters most? The reaction wasn't loud, at least not publicly. There were no statements rushed out, no emergency press conferences, no official acknowledgments of tension. But that silence is part of what fueled the speculation. In a league where every major moment usually gets framed quickly and carefully, the lack of response stood out. When something lands this close to the truth, the instinct is often to wait, to measure, to see how far the conversation spreads before stepping in. Behind the scenes, reports suggest the mood changed. Conversations that were once casual became guarded. People became more careful with their words. According to accounts circulating among media and league insiders, some players felt caught in the middle, unsure whether the moment would blow over or force a deeper reckoning.
Nothing was said officially, but the awareness shifted. You could sense that something had been acknowledged without being named. What made the speculation snowball wasn't just what Caitlin Clark did, but what others didn't do. There was no immediate clarification, no reassurance that lines were clearly drawn, no explanation of how overlapping roles are managed or why fans shouldn't be concerned. And in the absence of answers, people started asking sharper questions. Not accusations, just logical follow-ups that hadn't felt urgent before. Fans began connecting timelines, when alternative leagues were announced, when key governance discussions were happening, when marketing energy seemed split. None of this proves intent, and it's important to say that clearly, but optics matter, especially when trust is still being built. And once attention shifts from celebration to examination, everything gets scrutinized more closely. What's notable is that these concerns reportedly weren't new. Sources claim they'd been circulating quietly for months, discussed in private settings but rarely pushed into public view. Nobody wanted to be the first to challenge leadership. Nobody wanted to look divisive. That hesitation created a pressure valve effect. Once someone finally said enough, even indirectly, the release was immediate. Now the league is sitting in an uncomfortable middle space, not in crisis, but not at ease either. The conversation hasn't crossed into official action, but it hasn't gone away, and speculation tends to grow when clarity doesn't arrive. Whether the league chooses to address it directly or let it fade, one thing is already clear. What was once whispered is now part of the public narrative, and narratives, once formed, don't disappear easily. If this conversation keeps moving forward, the impact won't show up all at once. It never does. Change at the league level happens slowly, through pressure rather than announcements. And right now, that pressure is building in a very specific place: governance. Not headlines, not highlights, but the quiet rules and expectations that determine how much overlap is acceptable and how much is too much. There's already talk, at least at the discussion level, about what accountability could look like if concerns continue to grow. Not punishments, not ultimatums, just structure. Fans and analysts have begun asking whether clearer disclosure is necessary, whether certain roles require boundaries that haven't been fully defined yet, whether decision-makers with outside ventures should step away from specific conversations when interests overlap. These aren't radical ideas, they're standard questions in any organization dealing with rapid growth and expanding influence. The league also faces a reputational crossroads. Right now, the WNBA is telling a story about stability, momentum, and belief in its own future. If questions about divided focus linger too long without being addressed, that story gets harder to sell. Sponsors don't just invest in talent, they invest in clarity, in direction, in confidence that leadership knows exactly where it's going. Letting uncertainty hang in the air risks undermining the very progress the league has worked so hard to achieve.
For players, the stakes are just as real. A strong, unified league raises everyone's ceiling. A distracted one creates uneven ground. If the conversation turns into a broader call for reform, it could influence how future leaders are chosen and how power is distributed. That kind of shift wouldn't be about any single player or project. It would be about protecting the league from avoidable fractures before they widen. At the center of all of this is a simple truth. Moments like this don't come often. The attention is here. The audience is engaged. The opportunity is real. If leadership hesitates to align around one clear priority, history suggests the moment doesn't wait, it moves on. And conversations like this only keep going when people sense that something important is still unresolved. Whether the league steps in or lets time do the work, the line has already been drawn in the public mind. Focus versus fragmentation, commitment versus caution. And if the discussion refuses to fade, it may force decisions that were always coming, just earlier and louder than anyone planned. By the end of all this, one thing is undeniable. A line was drawn, even if no one picked up a marker. It wasn't written into policy, and it wasn't announced from a podium. It showed up through action, through presence, through someone choosing focus when distraction was easier. Caitlin Clark didn't demand change. She didn't issue ultimatums. She simply made it clear where she stands.
and that clarity forced everyone else to look at their own position. This moment wasn't about calling people out for ambition or questioning the right to build something new. It was about timing, responsibility, and loyalty to the product that made everything else possible. When a league reaches a rare window like this, half commitment becomes visible, divided attention becomes noticeable, and silence starts sounding like indecision. Clark didn't create that tension, she exposed it by refusing to participate in it. What makes this line so powerful is that it wasn't written with words alone. It was drawn with preparation, intensity, and a refusal to dilute her purpose. While debates swirl about future formats and alternative paths, she chose the present, the league as it exists, the game as it's played, the fans who show up expecting nothing more and nothing less than real basketball. That's not a rejection of progress, that's a demand that progress doesn't come at the cost of focus. Now the question isn't whether this conversation was fair, it's whether it fades, whether the league treats this as noise or as a signal. Because moments like this tend to linger. They resurface in decisions that feel heavier than they should, in choices that require alignment instead of compromise. The line has been noticed, and once people see it, they can't unsee it. Clark already made her choice. She showed up, she committed, she centered the game when everything else felt scattered. What happens next isn't about her anymore. It's about whether the league and its leadership are ready to meet that same standard.